Welcome to the Stripe pattern overview. So I'm going to show you how to set up Stripe in Bildr using this pattern. And the pattern has these demo pages you see here, which you can or don't have to use. Really what I'm showing you is when you import that pattern, you're going to get a few actions, Stripe specific actions. And so depending on your application and how it's set up, you just use those applications within the context of your app. But I'll go through how to set it up here and explain a little bit about what we're looking at and kind of what comes with the pattern. So the first thing to note is that there are two different types of Stripe payments. Well, there's subscriptions and payments, but in this case, I have these two pages because one thing you can do is you can sign someone up for a subscription in Stripe and tie it to their Bildr user. And that way, next time they sign in, you can read their subscription. And if you do it this way, Bildr does that for you automatically. So they'll link them automatically, so you don't have to worry about keeping them in sync. Which means that if they upgrade their subscription, or even cancel their subscription, might be more important, in Stripe outside of your app, next time they sign into your app, they're going to be synced up, and you're going to know that change happened, and you can react accordingly. So that's one way where you're doing a subscription tied to a Bildr user. And then there's a separate action or it's slightly different method for one-time payments in Stripe that aren't tied to a Bildr user at all. So you can use that for anything else where they just need to pay. And you can do it where they pay once and then you mark them as paid in your app. You can still track it your own way. But this is like if it's not a subscription that they're paying ongoing and you don't need to keep that in sync with their Bildr user. So I'll start with the subscriptions tied to Bildr users up here. And what I'm going to do, so on this page, there's a set of pre-made flows. And you don't have to use this exact same setup, but you can look through these and you'll likely use something like this because it's a nice way to organize it. But there's different things you can do like Stripe subscribe launch monthly, Stripe subscribe launch yearly. These are the different plans, pro monthly, pro yearly. And so right here you can see it's like there's a launch plan and a pro plan in this demo, and there's a toggle for monthly and yearly. So what I'm doing is I'm running different actions based on these, which button they click and what's toggled at the time. And then inside of these, there's another flow that I'm nesting here, Stripe initiate checkout all subscriptions. So if I look here, I have two different flows. So initiate checkout all subscriptions because it applies to anything that's a subscription. And then I have another one that's initiate checkout lifetime one-time purchase. And that's for this one down here. But that'll be a slightly different flow. They're basically different settings on this action if it's a one-time. So for these subscriptions, I'm going to start in there. And the way that Stripe works is when they click that subscribe button, you're going to use a product or a price ID, which is something in Stripe. So I'll go through that in a minute in your Stripe dashboard. And that price ID is going to generate a checkout session. So these are just Stripe's terms. And then you redirect your user to that Stripe checkout session. And then they'll be on Stripe's page. They'll fill out their credit card information. And they can actually, in there even sometimes, if you let them, change their plan or do different things. Then whether they successfully enter their credit card details, or whether they cancel, it's going to redirect them back to your app. And then you're going to handle what happens after that, in your own application. And so these actions, this Stripe launch monthly, for example, which is if they click this subscribe button here, I can actually show you. There's an event here on the subscribe button. So if I'm on the subscribe button here and I go to events, I can see the click event is Stripe subscribe launch monthly. So this action, Stripe subscribe launch monthly, sets a price ID variable for the launch monthly plan. And then it actually runs this flow, a nested flow that I was talking about a second ago, Stripe initiate all subscriptions. But really all that is this Stripe action that comes with the pattern. So I'll explain these settings in a second, but before I do, let's go to Stripe. And the way this works in Stripe, well, two things. First, you're going to have test data and live data in Stripe, and they each have their own API keys. So right now there's a toggle down here. I'm viewing test data of a Stripe account I have, and I can see it's marked test data here. And in Bildr, I'll show you the way you do secrets and API keys in a second. In Bildr, I'm using the test API key for this demo. So that's just a note to how that works. So when you're setting this up, you're going to want to set it up in test most likely. That way you can test transactions in your app. So you just use everything test. And then when you're ready, you untoggle this view test data and all your stuff switches. So this dashboard will switch to live data. Your API keys, when you look at them, will be live API keys. And when people actually use it, then it'll be a live transaction versus a test transaction. So that's just kind of a note about Stripe. And the way this works is in Stripe. So I'm on a home screen here and it's showing me some data. In Stripe, you have products. So you click products and you can see here I have the Pro plan, the launch plan, and then I think this is old, test subscription. But if I come in, so you add a product here and you just fill out some details for it. But if I come into Pro plan, inside of the plan is where I have pricing. And this is where there's actually like the yearly subscription for the Pro plan is a price. So it gets a price ID right here. And the lifetime is a price ID. And the monthly Pro subscription is a price with a price ID. So that's just kind of how that works. And then the launch plan, for example, in itself, it's a plan you make in Stripe, but it's not, you set different pricing tiers. So the launch plan has a launch lifetime with one price, a launch yearly with another price, a launch monthly. And these prices, you actually say whether you charge them yearly or whether you charge them monthly, and you say how much, you say if there's free trials, all that kind of stuff. That's all encompassed in a price. And then every price gets this price ID. And that's what we use in Bildr is this price ID. So when I'm doing these different buttons over here, I'm just triggering this Stripe action and giving it a different price ID based on, what's going on, what they had toggled and which button they clicked. So that's the gist of how that's set up. And that stuff in Stripe is up to you. So you're going to come in, you're going to create whatever type of plan. You might only have one plan and one price. You still do the same thing. You create a product and then you create a price because you're trying to get that price ID. Or, you might have 100 of these. It's all up to you, and what you call them is up to you. And you'll go through and see the settings in Stripe. Like when you click new plan, you fill out some stuff and you get a plan here. Pricing, you'll just click add another price right here. And that's how you add the different things. So that said, let's go through this Stripe action. So this is the actual action you get. And you come to it in here. Once you import the Stripe pattern, you can just search Stripe and look at all this stuff you get. So one of them that we're going to use is Stripe checkout, initiate checkout session. And this is the one that specifically says tied to a Bildr user. And so if you drug this action into any flow, the first thing it's going to ask you is for a Stripe secret key. And so that's the Stripe API key. So in Stripe, right now I'm in test data, remember, so this is going to show me my test API keys. You'll want to keep these secret. You're going to see mine here, but it's a test account, so it's fine. So if you come under developers on the left, the first option is API keys. You might actually have to generate this your first time, although I don't remember. I think it just gives you them. But you'll see there's a publishable key and a secret key. You're going to need these both to make Stripe work with Bildr or, with code. This is how Stripe works. So this publishable key, you can see is written right here, and I can click to copy. And then I have a secret key, and I can reveal it. If I click reveal, it'll show it here, and then I would copy it here. The secret key, as I mentioned, you keep secret. So you're going to want to reveal it and copy it. Then you're going to come into Bildr, and this might be blank. You might not have any secrets in your project yet. But you can click Manage Project Secrets. When you come in here, this pattern has one, Stripe secret key, or you can click New Secret and create one. This secret key, you're going to enter that value you just copied. And you're going to enter it. Bildr gives you the option to enter a different value for development, production, and test. Depending on how advanced you want to get, you could just paste the same value in all three, and that'll be fine. The key is when you go live, you just want to replace all three with your live API key so that it can work live. The way Stripe works is if you use the wrong key, like the products won't line up, and it won't actually let people use a test card in the real version or a real card in the test version. So they kind of flag you. So you should see. But basically, you can manage it that way, and then it's pretty simple. Or if you wanted, you can put in development, you can use the test API key. And then in production, you can add your real API key, your live API key. Then you never have to change them at all. And anytime you try to run a Stripe transaction in your development, like while you're working and live viewing, previewing, it'll be using this development. That's your development deployment. So it'll be using this development key, which is your test key. And then you publish to production, and your users who are using that production deployment, without you changing anything, they'll just use the live key. I actually find it's not too bad to keep it simpler, and just while you're developing, just pop the test key in each of these. And then once you get Stripe working, you usually don't change that part of it. So once it's working, you just come in here one time and replace these all with your live key. And then from then on, it's all live transactions. It's totally up to you how you want to manage that. But I recommend putting your Stripe secret, this right here, the secret key, in an actual Bildr secret. That way, it's more secure that way. That way, people can't look in the browser requests and find your secret and then basically use your Stripe account. So you do that, you manage project secrets, you set it up, and then you'll have to select it. So that's step one. And then once you do that, now Stripe's going to basically know you're authorized to do these transactions. So the next thing that the action asks you for is the price ID. So in this case, remember, we started with this Stripe Launch Monthly because they clicked the Launch Monthly button. And the Stripe Launch Monthly first set a variable called selected price ID. And this price here, if I go to, what did I say, Launch Monthly. So if I go to my products, launch plan, and I look for this monthly price, this value here, price underscore 1H lowercase h, will match. So price 1H lowercase h. So that's where I'm getting that price ID. And I set it as a variable so that I can just do this for each of the subscriptions in one action. But you could also just do a direct, the one that's tied to a Bildr user. You could just do this directly and start to fill that stuff out. And instead of using the Stripe plan ID from a variable, you could just do text and paste that price ID right there. I have it set up in the demo with the action or with the flow and with the variable, because then it's like one source of truth for all the subscription plans, but that is technically one step more advanced. So if you're in the Stripe checkout initiate checkout action, you set your key, you set the Stripe price ID, whether it's from that variable here, or if you type in text directly, and then you set the checkout mode to subscription, in this case, because it's a subscription. When you do the lifetime one-time payment or the other non-tied to Bildr users, you're going to select payment, but for this, you select subscription. Then it asks you for a success URL and a cancel URL. And what these are where it's going to redirect them, whether they successfully pay or whether they cancel. And so this can get a little tricky because you're going to start building this as a test product. You might not have a real domain, but in real life, you're going to want to redirect them to your real domain. So there's different ways to handle that without making it a hassle. But if you didn't want to, if you just wanted to type text, you could select text here and just type in your project domain /success for a success payment or /cancel for a cancel payment. Basically, you're going to need to make these routes, these page routes, and make pages to accommodate what happens. Or in the case of this demo, because I'm checking when they load the page if they have a subscription, what I do in this demo is I always redirect them back to the exact page they were on. And if I do that, I actually don't have to worry about whether there's a URL or what the URL even is, if it's testing or if it's the production version. I just take the success URL, I take it from system here. So if I drop all the way to the bottom here, there's system. And it gives you a bunch of options, which are kind of like the browser's, what you can read from the browser, what you could use JavaScript to read from the browser. So you can see them all listed here. There's some cool stuff in there, but for this one, taking location.href, that's how you'd write it in JavaScript, that's whatever the URL is. So I do this where on success, I just redirect them back to whatever URL they came from. So wherever your app is, whether it's live preview or whether it's the production, they click to pay. And if they're successful, it just redirects them back to that page they're on. And then same thing for cancel, I just do that. You could do something where you concatenate a value together and you take that href and then you concatenate, so you can do, I don't want to actually change this right now. I'm trying to keep this demo concise, believe it or not. You could change that to concatenate, where you could do the first one as a system href, and then the next value you could just type /success. that's another way to keep it a little more easy to manage. Otherwise, like I said, worst case scenario, you just go right into text here and just type a URL. But Stripe requires you to do that success URL and that cancel URL. And then, like I said, depending on what you do on those pages, that's going to be up to you to set up the remaining actions. But the Stripe pattern comes with actions, which I'll try to go over in a second, where you can check their subscription and whether you can handle that stuff. It's still built in. It's still pretty easy. Okay, so after cancel URL, allow promotional codes is up to you. It's just a setting. And then here you can set a variable name for the checkout session ID. So what happens with this action is it's initiating a checkout, which means in Stripe terms, it's creating a checkout session. It's initiating a checkout session. And so that checkout session gets an ID and gets returned. You don't have to know this, but this is just how it works. So this checkout session that they returned you, we're setting in a variable called checkout session ID. But you can make that variable anything you want. It defaults to checkout session ID, and you can just keep it at that and not care about it. Because the next thing you do on a success here, it says action to run. You're going to run another flow that I built over here, Stripe redirect to checkout. And that redirect to checkout is going to use this checkout session ID variable. So on redirect to checkout, if I look at this, I can click here to shortcut to it, but it's in this flows list, Stripe redirect to checkout. That's using an action that you get with the Stripe pattern, a single action. So again, you could just use this action directly, but I put it in its own flow because many different things then can run a redirect to checkout. So any of these subscriptions, once that checkout variable is set, it's a variable, I just need to run that same redirect to checkout from all those different ones. So I made it its own flow, which is just one action. So Stripe checkout, redirect to checkout. Here, the settings are a little different, but the one setting is the one I was just talking about here. The session ID is that variable. So it comes from variable, checkout session ID. And if you change the name of that variable, you'll have to change it here too. But if you leave it blank, both default and will work. So it's going to already know to send it that session ID. The thing you have to fill out is the publishable API key. And I apologize for this. This complexity comes from Stripe, and I swear it's like Stripe makes it so much easier than it ever used to be because it's a security thing. It's payments on the internet. So anyway, this publishable API key, if you come back to your developers and then API keys section, we were using the secret key, but they also give you a publishable key, and it's the same deal. This one's test. You can see it starts with PK_test. And the secret, I didn't actually show that, but it starts with SK_test. So you can see when it's the test key. But this publishable key, this is a test. It'll switch to live if I view live. But you're going to use this, and it's not a secret. So I just have it typed in here with a text field. If you wanted to be extra secure, you could make a new secret for the publishable key, and that'd be fine. But Stripe gives it to you, and they call it publishable because it's not a secret. You're allowed to publish it. So I just use, and you need it for this to redirect them to the checkout. So I use my publishable API key here. And again, just like the secret key, when you go live, you're going to need to change this to live. So that might be another reason to use secrets. If you're using the method where you have development as the test key and production as the live key, you could do the same thing for publishable. You never have to worry about them. But you will need to change that to live. And what it does is it creates the checkout session ID, Stripe does, with your secret, and then it matches that to your publishable key. So they have to match up. It's a Stripe thing. So set your publishable API key, set that checkout session ID, which should be all default for you, and then you just redirect to checkout. And what this action will do is when these are filled out, it'll redirect them based on what they originally clicked on in the checkout session you originally created. They'll redirect them to this one-time checkout session that Stripe has generated for them. It's like a temporary thing. So like I said earlier, from there they pay, and then they'll get redirected to your URL. So at this point, you pretty much, you did it. You set up their Stripe, like they've paid you if you got this far. You set up their Stripe, but it's not 100% useful until you're doing something with that subscription. So I'll just show you, maybe I can even just show you in here. Let's see if I have any of those. Oh, I might have something created actually. So when your page loads in your app, you're probably going to want to do this like on something that runs on every page, or if you're making more of a single page app, you're going to do this like on page load. But you're going to basically always going to want to check for things like if they're signed in general or if they have a subscription. And so I have something created. So I have a couple things created, it looks like. Stripe check for Bildr user step 1, Stripe check for customer step 2, and Stripe create customer step 3. And so I remember now as I'm going through this, I'll explain what each of these are and why why you have to do them this way to make it easier on yourself in the future with Bildr. So the first part, Stripe check for Bildr user, and it's labeled step 1 in this demo, is you need to find out if they're signed in or not. Because if they're signed in, you're going to create a Stripe user for them. And then I didn't mention it when we were setting up this action to create this checkout session ID, but behind the scenes, part of what we're sending to Stripe is actually their Stripe user that's created and stored on their account in Bildr. So the first thing we need to do when the page loads, and actually I should take a step back. If I go to page load, which runs on every page, it runs one action, page binding. And that's over here too. But if I go to that page binding action, and this is on every page again, here's where I start this process. So it runs the data page bindings, which is default. That's going to set any values from the database and things like that. But then it's going to run, because I put it in here, Stripe check for Bildr user step 1. So that way, every time a page loads, we're checking for a Bildr user first. So it's a condition, is user signed in? It's one action in Bildr. You just search for it. You can search for a condition, and you'll see condition, user signed in. They get it. If they are signed in, you run one action, and if they're not signed in, you run another. In this case, because the subscription, we know they're creating a user first and then doing a subscription. So if they're not signed in, I don't have to do anything. They're not going to even have an opportunity. But you might want to actually handle that. In a more correct way, I would handle like them not being signed in and do something else, like hide Stripe stuff maybe, or change messaging. In this case, for this demo, I'm just worried about if they are signed in. I'm going to run this action, Stripe check for customer step 2. So that's the one over here, or I can shortcut to it here. And this is where the first custom Stripe action comes in this flow anyway, that you get with the pattern. So this one's called Stripe current user is a customer, question mark. So this is checking if your current Bildr user is a Stripe customer. And so in this case, what I'm doing is if they're not a Stripe customer, I'm going to make them one, and then their Bildr user will be a Stripe customer. So the next time it checks, if it checks and they are a Stripe customer, I just don't have to do anything. So as you can see, if they're not a customer, it's going to run this check. If they're not a customer, I'm going to run Stripe create customer, an action that I created, step 3. And if they already are a Stripe customer, I just ignore it. So I just don't fill anything out for that, and it'll just keep moving. And so that way, every time, again, the page loads, it's going to check if they're a Bildr user. If they are, it's going to check if they're a Stripe customer. If they are, we're good, nothing. If they are not, which is basically the first time they come here, it's going to create them as a Stripe customer. And that's using another action that comes with the Bildr pattern. So this Stripe create a customer has a few settings I'll go over in a second. But basically, you just need to run that on a Bildr user, which will create that customer ID, and it will store it on their Bildr user without you having to care about any of that. And that's also how you can tell which subscription they're on later and stuff like that. But for this case, we're just creating that user. And so in your Stripe account, you'll actually see them under customers, I believe. Yeah, I got a bunch of tests in here. And you'll see the users that get created, but they won't have a plan for their user. But there'll be like a user for this company in Stripe, like this account in Stripe. And so when they get that customer ID, we just tie that to their Bildr user ID. So to run through this Stripe create a customer, you're going to set a similar thing with the Stripe secret key as the original action to initiate a checkout session. So you'll already have it. So you don't need to go to manage project secrets again, because it's the same key for the other action. So you can just select your Stripe secret key. Then for customer's email address, because you're sending Stripe their email address to create them a customer, you can go like from this dropdown, you can select current user info, because you know they're signed in. That's how you got to this step. Select current user info and select login ID, which is their email. So they log in with is their email. And then customer's name, if you happen to know it, but based on your flow, you can select it, but that's not required. In this demo, I don't just ignore it. It's just blank. But customer ID, you do need to, well, I guess you don't need to know that. This is extra too, now that I think about it. I think I just set this because this way, This will set a variable in Stripe for their Bildr customer ID. So it's a good way you can it's an extra check if you can cross-check these, but you don't really need this, I don't think either. But customer ID, I have coming current user info, and I have selected ID, which would be their Bildr user ID. And so I create a Stripe customer with these fields, and now everything else is taken care of. So it's going to create them as a customer in Stripe, but it's also going to send their customer ID back from Stripe and tie that to their Bildr user all in the background. So that's one thing. And then there should be, I may not have a full flow for it in here, but then there's another, I'm just going to show this and not go through it. Oh, sorry. Let's see. So here you go. So there's a couple around this. So I'll actually talk about a couple of these. Stripe current user has an active subscription is very similar to current user is a Stripe customer, where it's like a check to see if they have an active subscription or not, and then run an action whether they do or whether they don't. Stripe customer billing portal open is another action, and you actually have to set up. Let's see where it is. I don't remember exactly where it is. Maybe it's under settings. Yeah. Customer portal. So settings, billing, customer portal in Stripe. You set a few options here, and then you can use this action in Bildr. All you have to do is set those options, which basically opens your portal. And then this action will just redirect them to a Stripe-based portal where they can cancel their plan, upgrade their plan, change their card details, any of that stuff, and you don't have to build it into your app. But once it's updated, your app will know about it. So it's kind of cool, and it's just like a link. You basically have a button or a link, and on click, you run customer billing portal open, and Bildr will know what their customer ID is and what plan they're on and all that stuff. So it'll take care of the rest for you. And then there's some other ones, like you can retrieve their customer details and set them in a variable. So you could that's where you'd actually find what plan they're on if you need to know. Or here, it's actually this one. That would be their customer details in Stripe. This one is their subscription details. Retrieve prices would be like if you didn't know your price ID, if you didn't go into your dashboard and actually go to products, choose one, go to pricing, and check this price ID. You could set something up. You'd have to build this all out where you actually can list the price ID, or you can list the products that you have in a Stripe account. And so those would actually be very useful in cases where you're making a marketplace or something else where you're using someone else's Stripe account. There's all different situations where those would come into play. But for this case, really what you need is those initial ones I described in more detail, and then the ones in here to create that Stripe customer. These subscribe ones, if you try to create a checkout session without a Stripe customer, it won't actually work. And so you could actually create that customer in one shot, and then right afterwards create that checkout session ID. I like the method where we create them a Stripe customer off the bat for all your users, because then they just have it, and then every other things can work in your app. If it's reading it, it won't be blank. There's all these other reasons. That's how I do my flows. But again, like Bildr, it doesn't care how you build, so you could build that in a different way. But real quick then, let me just go through the last thing, which is this one-time purchase. And this is a flow in here, initiate checkout one-time purchase. We originally had the subscription flow I talked about. This one-time purchase uses a similar action, but this one you can see in parentheses that's not tied to Bildr user. And you select almost everything else the same. You can see these actions, if you remember, these inputs are almost the same, but instead of subscription, I have payment selected. But everything else, success URL is the same, checkout session ID, you need it all. Stripe redirect to checkout, actually on success runs the same action that the other one runs. The difference here is this one that has parentheses not tied to Bildr user. Once this runs in the background, it doesn't try to tie that Stripe customer ID stuff to the Bildr user and subscription to the Bildr user. So it's a little different. And when you're using them, in that case, they're actually barely different at all. Really, you just select payment or subscription, but you could select that for either one anyway. Because you could, in theory, tie a one-time payment to a Bildr user. So you could do it that way. Anyway, that was a really long overview. It's half an hour, and if I end in 15 seconds, it'll be under half an hour. So I'm going to end there and try to fill in the rest with additional videos. Thanks for watching.